At the annual company picnic, Mary Beth had laughed a little too loud when Carl Peterson put his arm around her waist, openly asking her about that weekend trip we discussed. My coffee cup slipped, splashing hot liquid onto my shirt, leaving a dark, spreading stain. Carl just smirked, his eyes on my chest. Some people just can't hold their liquor, can they, Frank? The memory of Mary Beth's laugh, light and easy, still snagged at Frank's mind. It had been just a casual joke, something about a date with Carl Peterson, her boss. She had delivered it with a playful smirk, a mischievous glint in her eyes, as she'd pulled on her coat that morning. The words had settled in Frank's gut like a cold stone, churning slowly through the hours he spent staring at spreadsheets. He could still see her face, framed by the kitchen light, the way her hair caught the sun. It was nothing, he told himself. Just Mary Beth, being Mary Beth. But the stone kept turning. Earth to Frank. Tim, his cubicle neighbor, broke through the hum of the office. Tim leaned over the partition, a half-eaten Danish in his hand. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost. Or maybe just another Monday." Frank blinked, pushing the image of Mary Beth away. "Yeah, fine, Tim. Just wrestling with the Johnson account. Numbers aren't adding up." It was an easy lie, one Tim didn't question, but Frank's mind was elsewhere. A notion, thin and brittle, started to form. He could surprise Mary Beth at work, bring her lunch. Just a nice gesture. He pulled out his phone, a habit he wasn't proud of. Checking Mary Beth's social media had become a nervous tick, a clandestine search for reassurance. Or maybe for something else entirely. He scrolled through her feed, his thumb moving with a jerky rhythm. A post from an hour ago caught his eye. A selfie of Mary Beth, smiling brightly, a half-empty coffee cup in front of her. In the blurred background, behind her shoulder, Carl Peterson was visible, leaning back in a chair, a wide smile on his face, mid-laugh. The sight of Carl, so casually in her frame, made Frank's heart skip a beat, a cold jolt through his chest. Frank pushed away from his desk. The Johnson account would wait. He grabbed his keys, mumbled something about a client meeting to Tim, who merely grunted in response. The drive to Mary Beth's office building was a blur of honking horns and brake lights. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. He tried to reason with himself, to chalk it up to an overreaction. People had working lunches. Colleagues took selfies. There was nothing to see here, nothing at all. He pulled into a visitor parking spot, the engine still ticking as he cut the power. Inside the cool, glass-fronted lobby, Agnes, the receptionist, looked up from her computer. Her smile was practiced, polite. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice even. "Mary Beth just left for lunch about 10 minutes ago. She went with Mr. Peterson." The words hit Frank like a physical blow. The world tilted. The polished marble floor suddenly unsure beneath his feet. He mumbled something, a choked sound, a half-formed thanks, and stumbled back towards the exit. The air outside felt too thick, too warm. He walked aimlessly, his destination forgotten, until he found himself in front of a small cafe, its awning striped in faded red and white. He pushed through the door, needing to sit, to process. He ordered a coffee, the kind he knew Mary Beth liked, almost out of habit. He scanned the room, finding an empty booth in the corner. As he waited for his order, a figure walked through the door. Carl Peterson. Alone. He wore a crisp blue shirt, his hair perfectly combed. Carl looked around, not seeing Frank hidden in the corner, and walked to the counter. The sight confirmed Frank's worst fears. Frank stood up, the coffee cup still cold in his hand. He walked towards Carl. His steps measured, deliberate. Carl turned as Frank approached, a faint flicker of surprise in his eyes that quickly smoothed over. "Carl," Frank said, his voice flat. "Fancy meeting you here." Carl offered a tight smile. "Frank, didn't expect to see you. Is it a surprise?" Frank asked, the question hanging in the air. "I mean, seeing as you just had lunch with my wife?" Carl's smile widened, a practiced, corporate gesture. "Ah, yes, Mary Beth. We just wrapped up a working lunch, brainstorming for the upcoming client presentation. She's quite excellent, you know, very sharp." He kept his tone even, professional, but Frank heard the dismissiveness in it, the casual ownership. Frank's hands clenched around the coffee cup. "Tell me, Carl." He pushed, his voice dropping slightly. "Is it company policy to take married employees to lunch alone? Or is Mary Beth just getting special treatment?" The smoothness vanished from Carl's face. His eyes, a pale blue, hardened. "I think you need to be very careful about what you're suggesting, Frank." His voice was low, devoid of its previous warmth. The implied threat hung in the air, a cold, sharp blade. Frank stared at him, reeling from the words, the sudden shift in Carl's demeanor. There was nothing more to say here. Not now. He turned abruptly, leaving the coffee untouched on the counter, and stormed out of the cafe. The afternoon sun beat down, but Frank felt a chill settle deep in his bones. The vague notion from earlier had solidified into a cold, hard plan. He needed proof. The smell of garlic and tomatoes hit Frank as he unlocked the front door, a familiar comfort that almost loosened the knot in his stomach. Mary Beth was at the stove, stirring a pot, her back to him. The kitchen light cast a warm glow on her hair. For a moment, a brief, fragile moment, he almost believed everything was normal, that the chill from Carl Peterson's words was just the lingering draft of a bad dream. She turned, a smile on her face, the steam from the pot misting her glasses slightly. "Hey, you're home. How was your day?" "Mine was a whirlwind." Her tone was light, unaffected. Frank forced a smile, a slight tug at the corners of his mouth that felt alien to his face. "Yeah. Busy. Same old. What was your whirlwind?" Mary Beth began to recount her day, detailing client calls and project deadlines, the usual office hum. She spoke of a particularly difficult spreadsheet, of a new intern's clumsy mistakes, of a memo from corporate. Frank listened, his ears straining, waiting for a mention of Carl, for any casual reference to their lunch. She talked around it, danced over it, conspicuously leaving out the 10 minutes with Carl, the specific detail that had driven Frank here, to this moment. The omission was a silent scream. He watched her ladle sauce into a serving dish. "Did you get lunch today?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even, casual. Mary Beth paused, the ladle halfway to the bowl. Her eyes flickered away for a fraction of a second before meeting his. "Oh yeah," she said, her voice a little too quick. "Just grabbed a quick sandwich at my desk. Too much to do today." The lie, small and sharp, landed in Frank's gut. It wasn't just an omission. It was a deliberate fabrication. The comfortable warmth of the kitchen vanished, replaced by a sudden, icy air. He took a step closer, his voice low, no longer bothering with casual. "That's funny, because I stopped by your office earlier. Thought I'd surprise you with a coffee. And the receptionist, Agnes, she said you'd gone out for lunch. With Carl Peterson." Mary Beth froze. The ladle clattered against the ceramic bowl. She turned to face him fully, her expression a mix of guilt and something else, something harder, a spark of defiance. "Frank," she started, her voice tight. "It was just a working lunch. A project meeting. We do them all the time. I didn't think it was worth mentioning." Frank felt a bitter laugh bubble in his throat. "Worth mentioning? Mary Beth, you just lied to me. Straight to my face. A quick sandwich at your desk? What was the point of that?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I didn't lie. I just omitted it. Because I knew you'd react like this. You've been so paranoid lately, Frank. It's exhausting. Every time I mention Carl, you get that look." Her voice rose with each word, a defensive edge hardening it. "Paranoid?" Frank echoed, his own voice beginning to climb. "You think I'm paranoid when you're out having lunch with your boss, smiling in selfies, and then you come home and lie to me about it? It was a selfie for the team, for Christ's sake." She shot back, stepping away from the stove. The scent of burning food, sharp and acrid, began to fill the kitchen. Dinner was forgotten. "You know how he is, Frank. He's always taking pictures. It's part of the company culture. And I just didn't want to deal with another interrogation tonight." "Another interrogation?" Frank's voice was now loud, echoing in the confined space of the kitchen. "This isn't an interrogation, Mary Beth. This is me trying to understand why my wife is lying to me. Accusations flew, words thrown like stones, each one leaving a bruise. The simmering pot on the stove bubbled furiously, its contents blackening, ignored. Finally, Mary Beth threw her hands up. "You know what, Frank? I'm done with this conversation. I can't do this anymore tonight." She spun on her heel, her shoulders stiff, and stormed out of the kitchen, the sound of her footsteps retreating up the stairs. The bedroom door closed with a soft, definitive click. Frank stood alone in the silence, the smell of burnt food thick in the air. He sank into a kitchen chair, the plastic seat cold beneath him. His hands trembled, a slight tremor he couldn't control. How had a stupid joke, a playful smirk, escalated into this nightmare? His mind replayed her hesitation, her quick lie, the defiance in her eyes. If Mary Beth wouldn't be honest, if she was going to hide things, he realized with a heavy, sickening certainty, then he would have to find the truth himself. The idea of going through her things, of invading her privacy, made him feel a cold, clammy sickness. But the gnawing doubt, the unsettling feeling that she was keeping something vital from him, was far worse. He pushed himself up from the chair. The light was still on in the small home office, just off the living room. Mary Beth's laptop sat open on the desk, its screen a dim rectangle in the darkened room. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the keyboard. A line had been crossed, he knew, a boundary breached, but her lie, the outright lie about the sandwich, drove him forward. He touched the trackpad, waking the screen. He saw her email, then her browser history. Nothing out of the ordinary. He was about to close it, feeling a pang of shame, when his gaze caught a folder icon on the desktop. It was simply labeled personal. His heart gave a hard thump against his ribs. He clicked on it. Inside the personal folder, Frank found a subfolder simply labeled Work Files. The innocuous title was a cruel joke. He clicked it open, and there it was. A series of intimate emails between Mary Beth and Carl Peterson. The words jumped out at him, each one a sharp, poisoned dart. "My dearest MB," one began, followed by a pet name Frank had sometimes used himself. "Can't stop thinking about our afternoon. The way you laughed. The way you touched me." Another spoke of secret rendezvous, and counting the minutes until we can be alone again. Shared memories, private jokes, plans for future encounters. It was all there, laid bare in cold, digital text. He scrolled through the dates, a horrifying timeline unfolding. Weeks turned into months. This wasn't a sudden mistake, a momentary lapse. This was calculated, sustained deception, far deeper and longer than his initial suspicions could have imagined. His stomach churned, a heavy sickness spreading through him. One email, dated several months prior, explicitly mentioned a weekend trip they took together. "Can't wait for our conference next month," Carl had written, followed by a winking emoji. Mary Beth had claimed that particular trip was a solo business conference, a chance for her to network and advance her career. She'd even called him from the hotel, sounding tired but professional. Frank remembered the conversation clearly. The memory now twisted into something grotesque. He found photos too, a separate subfolder, Mary Beth and Carl, laughing, their faces close, arms around each other. One showed them on a beach, waves crashing behind them. Mary Beth in a sundress he didn't recognize, Carl in shorts. Another, more damning, was taken indoors, intimate lighting, Carl kissing Mary Beth's forehead, her eyes closed, a soft smile on her lips. It was a setting Frank had never seen, certainly not a place she had ever mentioned. Then, a text message thread, screenshotted and saved. The words were explicit, raw with desire. Carl promising to leave his wife, telling Mary Beth she was the only one who truly understood him. Mary Beth's replies, equally passionate, talking about their future, about the life they would build together. Frank felt a cold, consuming rage ignite within him. A deep, visceral betrayal, unlike anything he had ever known. The air felt thin, his lungs struggling to draw breath. He didn't know how long he sat there, staring at the screen, letting the words and images carve themselves into his mind. Finally, mechanically, he reached for a small flash drive he kept in his desk drawer. He plugged it into the laptop, his hands trembling slightly, almost imperceptibly. He began to copy everything. The emails, the photos, the text messages. Each click of the mouse was a deliberate act, building a digital fortress of undeniable proof. When he was done, the small drive warm in his hand, he closed the laptop, trying to erase his digital invasion. But the images, the words, they were burned into his mind, an indelible mark. The familiar hum of the house felt suffocating, closing in on him. He couldn't bear to face Mary Beth, sleeping soundly down the hall. Oblivious to the destruction unfolding in the quiet office, his first instinct was to call someone, to unleash the torrent of anger and pain. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Tim's name. He started dialing, but then stopped, hanging up before Tim could even answer. No, he couldn't confide in anyone yet. Not like this. Not when the wound was so fresh, so gaping. Frank sat in the darkness of the office, the flash drive a heavy weight in his pocket. The utter destruction of his world, the complete shattering of his marriage, settled over him with a crushing finality. Mary Beth's dismissive word, paranoid, echoed in his mind. The irony a bitter, sickening taste on his tongue. She had made him out to be the unreasonable one, the distrustful husband, while all along, she had been meticulously building her secret life. A single tear, hot and stinging, rolled down his cheek. Then another, tracing a path through the faint stubble on his jaw. A silent cascade of heartbreak, of loss. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, the gesture rough, almost violent. In that quiet, dark moment, a new resolve began to form, cold and hard as steel. Mary, Beth, and Carl, they would pay the price for their deception. He would see to it. Morning arrived with a chilling normalcy. The sun, indifferent to the turmoil inside, streamed through the kitchen window, casting bright squares on the tiled floor. Mary Beth moved about the kitchen, her movements fluid and practiced, making coffee, toasting bread. She hummed a little tune Frank didn't recognize. She acted as if nothing had happened, as if the previous night's argument, his discoveries, had simply vanished into the darkness. Frank sat at the kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee growing cold in front of him. He felt hollowed out, gutted. He watched her, the familiar curve of her back, the way her hair caught the light. He wanted to speak, to scream. But the words felt too large, too heavy, caught somewhere in his throat. The weight of the truth, of the digital evidence on the flash drive tucked deep in his pocket, crushed him. She placed a plate of toast in front of him, a small smile on her face. "You look like you didn't sleep a wink," she said, her voice light. He pushed the plate away, his gaze fixed on her. His voice, when it finally came, was calm, almost unnervingly so, but with a steely edge. "I know about Carl, Mary Beth. All of it." Her smile faltered, then vanished. Her face, usually so expressive, paled to an ashen gray. Her eyes, wide and suddenly wary, darted to the laptop, still on the desk in the office, visible from the kitchen doorway. Then, a flush of desperate anger rose to her cheeks. "You went through my laptop," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper, then rising to a hiss. "How could you, Mary Beth?" Frank retorted, his voice rising, matching hers in intensity. "How could you lie to me for months? For a year, by the looks of it. Telling me about solo business trips, when you were with him, sending him explicit messages, making plans for your future together." She took a step back, her hands coming up in a defensive gesture. "It was just a mistake, Frank, a moment of weakness. It wasn't serious. Not really. I was lonely. You've been so distant, working such long hours." Her voice was laced with desperation, trying to minimize, trying to shift the blame. Frank reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He navigated to a specific file, his thumb steady despite the tremor in his gut. He pressed play. The small speaker filled the quiet kitchen with Carl Peterson's voice, husky and intimate, layered over Mary Beth's soft laughter. "My sweet MB," Carl's voice purred. "That night was everything. I need you. I can't wait to be with you. Truly. My wife means nothing to me. Not anymore. Not after you." The explicit words, the raw desires, hung in the air. a physical presence. Mary Beth stared at the phone, then at Frank, her face crumbling. Her knees seemed to buckle. She sank into the chair opposite him, covering her face with her hands, sobs racking her body. "Frank, please," she wailed, the sound raw and broken. "I'm so sorry. It's true, all of it. I messed up. Please, please forgive me." "Yes." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, tears streaming. "But you don't understand, Frank. You were never here, always working, always thinking about the next deadline. I felt invisible. He made me feel seen. Special. It wasn't my fault entirely." We grew apart. Frank felt a cold, hard knot tighten in his chest. "Don't you dare, Mary Beth," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. I worked those hours for us, for this house, for our future. I supported you. I listened to you. I stood by you when your mother was sick. My loyalty was unwavering. You chose this. You made these choices, day after day. For months." He pushed himself up from the table, the untouched coffee still steaming faintly. "I want you out of this house, Mary Beth. Today. I can't live under the same roof as you. Not anymore." Her head snapped up, her face a mask of shock and terror. "No, Frank, please, don't say that. We can fix this. We can work through it. For everything we've built, our life together. Please, I'll do anything." She reached for his hand, but he pulled back, his skin crawling. He felt no pity, only a cold, unyielding resolve. The years of trust, the foundation of their life, were irrevocably broken, shattered beyond repair. He walked to the bedroom, pulled a small duffel bag from the closet, and began to pack a few of her essentials. A change of clothes, her toothbrush, some toiletries. He didn't include anything of sentimental value. He zipped it shut, walked back to the kitchen, and placed it gently, deliberately, by the front door. It was a definitive signal. Mary Beth stared at the bag, then back at him, her plea dying in her throat. Her shoulders sagged in defeat. She stood up slowly, walked to the bag, picked it up, and without another word, without a backward glance, she walked out the door. The latch clicked shut, and the silence in the house, a sudden, heavy void, screamed louder than any argument could have. The small town, as small towns do, absorbed the news quickly. It wasn't a shout, it was a ripple, a series of knowing glances and hushed conversations at the grocery store, at the gas station. Frank felt it, the invisible pressure of their collective gaze. Neighbors offered awkward, strained sympathies, their eyes lingering a moment too long. Old friends gave him curious, uncertain looks, as if trying to decipher a puzzle he wore on his face. He felt exposed, stripped bare for public consumption, even though no one spoke directly of Mary Beth or Carl. The silence was louder than any accusation. His parents called, their voices laced with worry. "Everything all right, son?" his mother asked, her tone carefully neutral, sensing the tension, the unspoken. Frank offered vague answers, something about Mary Beth needing some space, a rough patch. He couldn't bring himself to tell them the full, ugly truth. Not yet. The words felt too heavy to share, too destructive to unleash on them. He started missing work, the office feeling like a foreign place. His emails piled up, unread, spreadsheets blurred into meaningless grids of numbers. He found himself staring at the ceiling for hours. The grief, a dull ache in his chest. The rage, a cold, tight knot in his stomach. The days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light outside his window. Then Tim called, his voice genuinely concerned. "Hey Frank, heard you weren't in. Everything okay over there? Don't worry about the reports, I can cover for a bit. But seriously, man, you just want to talk? Or yell? I'm here." Dak. Tim's offer, steady and uncomplicated, was a lifeline Frank hadn't realized he needed. He agreed to meet for coffee, not the cafe from before, but a quieter diner on the edge of town. Over lukewarm refills, Frank confided everything. He laid out the timeline, the emails, the photos, the explicit messages. He spoke of the lies, the betrayal, the crushing weight of deceit. He poured out his heartbreak, the words coming out in a low, even monotone that belied the turmoil within him. Tim listened, his face grim, his usually easygoing demeanor replaced by a fierce protectiveness. "Damn it, Frank," Tim finally said, slamming his fist gently on the table, making the sugar caddy jump. "That son of a bitch. And Mary Beth. I just can't believe it. I am so sorry, man. You didn't deserve any of this." His anger, raw and genuine, validated Frank's own, a solid confirmation that his feelings of betrayal were not just justified, but shared. A few days later, Mary Beth called. Her voice was small, hesitant, unlike the confident tone he was used to. "Frank," she began, a faint tremor in her words. "Carl, he's backed off. He said he can't leave his wife. Not now. He said it was a mistake. He's pretending like nothing happened." She sounded lost, alone, the desperate remorse evident in every syllable. Her dream of a new life, built on their deception, had crumbled. But Frank's resolve, forged in the fires of betrayal, remained unshaken. Her pleas for understanding, her newfound vulnerability, landed on deaf ears. He hung up, the silence after her call a stark contrast to the cacophony of his thoughts. He spent the next few hours at his computer, not on work, but searching. Divorce lawyers, the names, the fees, the processes. He scrolled through articles about asset division, alimony, child support, though they had no children. The financial and emotional toll ahead loomed large, a mountain he would have to climb alone. He knew the road ahead would be long, fraught with legal battles and emotional wreckage, but he was prepared. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. A dark temptation flickered in his mind. Carl's wife. He could call her. Expose Carl's hypocrisy. Shatter his perfect world, as Mary Beth had shattered theirs. The idea was compelling, a visceral desire for justice, or perhaps just for revenge. Memories of their wedding day, a bright, sunlit afternoon, flashed through his mind. Mary Beth in her white dress, her eyes shining as they exchanged vows, their shared dreams of a small house, a garden, quiet evenings. The images twisted the knife, turning the sweetness of the past into a bitter agony in the present. He needed air, space. He grabbed his old fishing rod, though he had no intention of casting a line. He drove out to his childhood fishing spot, a quiet bend in the muddy river where he'd spent countless summer afternoons. The familiar landscape, the rustling leaves of the old oak, the scent of damp earth, offered a faint, fragile sense of solace. He sat on a fallen log, watching the slow, indifferent current of the river. A solitary figure against the vast, indifferent sky, contemplating his shattered life. The true cost of infidelity, he understood now, wasn't just a broken heart. It was a broken life, a future dissolved, a past tainted. A quiet, cold determination settled over him. He wouldn't let them get away with this. Not Carl, not Mary Beth. The determination that had settled over Frank by the muddy river began to harden into a cold, calculating anger. He was no longer reacting. He was planning. A meticulous blueprint of retribution started to form in his mind. Each step precise, deliberate. First, the evidence. He sat for hours at his dining room table, spreading out printouts of the emails, transcribing text messages onto clean sheets of paper. He organized the photos chronologically, cross-referencing dates with Mary Beth's calendar, highlighting the solo business trips. The flash drive, his initial repository, became a comprehensive dossier, a carefully indexed collection of digital betrayal. Each piece of paper was a nail in the coffin of their deception. Next, Carl Peterson. Frank discreetly began reaching out to some of Carl's colleagues he knew through various industry events. The calls were casual at first, ostensibly about work, but laced with subtle, leading questions. "Carl seems to be on the road a lot lately, doesn't he?" Or, "Heard Carl's quite the go-getter, always pushing boundaries, even outside of work, huh?" The answers were innocuous enough, but they provided context. A background hum of Carl's perceived ambition, and sometimes, his recklessness. He then contacted a private investigator he found online, a retired cop with a reputation for discretion. The instructions were specific. Document Carl's movements, especially during work hours. Frank suspected Carl was using company resources, phones, perhaps even travel expenses to facilitate the affair. Confirming professional negligence, leveraging company time and assets for personal liaisons, would be critical. Armed with these preliminary findings, Frank carefully crafted several anonymous tips to Carl's company's human resources department. He didn't accuse directly. Instead, he highlighted potential conflicts of interest and possible misuse of company time and resources, suggesting HR look into Mr. Peterson's recent travel and expenditure reports. He left just enough breadcrumbs to spark an investigation, without revealing his hand. He also prepared a detailed, but carefully worded, account of Carl's affair with Mary Beth, emphasizing the business trips she had accompanied him on. He framed it not as a heartbroken husband's rant, but as a concerned party witnessing potential impropriety and a breach of corporate ethics, painting Mary Beth as an unwitting, perhaps even manipulated, participant to deflect suspicion from himself and to ensure the focus remained on Carl's professional conduct. Then came Martha, Carl's wife. Frank researched her online, found her LinkedIn profile, her social media accounts, even some local charity groups she was involved with. He scrolled through pictures of her children, Carl often beside them, smiling broadly. The temptation to send the entire dossier directly to Martha was a dark, persistent whisper. He wrestled with the morality of involving an innocent party, a woman who, like him, was a victim of Carl's deception. He decided against it. Not yet. He would let the consequences unfold through official channels first. His primary aim was to hit Carl professionally and financially. If HR acted, if Carl's career and reputation crumbled, that would be a significant victory. Martha would find out eventually, through Carl or through the inevitable gossip. Frank preferred to be an instrument of justice, not just raw revenge. He started subtly reaching out to Mary Beth's closest friends, not with accusations, but with carefully chosen phrases. "I'm just so worried about Mary Beth," he'd say. Or, "I always thought Carl was a bit of a shark, didn't you?" He implied Carl's manipulative nature, shifting some of the blame onto him, subtly shaping their perception of the affair. He knew that social circles, once fractured, were hard to mend. He rehearsed difficult conversations in his head, envisioning Mary Beth's inevitable attempts at reconciliation. He practiced his responses, strengthening his resolve, building a shield against her pleas. There would be no second chances, no working through it. That ship had sailed with the first lie. He drafted a legal separation agreement, detailing asset division, spousal support, the sale of the house. He had pulled templates from online, customizing them to their situation. The legal jargon was cold, precise, a stark contrast to the emotional wreckage it represented. He was preparing for the inevitable, laying the groundwork for a clean, albeit painful, break. Late nights blurred into early mornings, fueled by stale coffee and a simmering desire for justice. The weight of his actions, the deliberate dismantling of 2 lives, settled on him, a heavy mantle. But the sharp, persistent pain of betrayal, of seeing his trust systematically destroyed, outweighed any moral qualms. He was no longer just a victim, adrift in a sea of hurt. He was an agent of change, methodical and relentless, ready to make them pay the price. Frank mailed the meticulously compiled dossier. One package, marked confidential, went to Carl Peterson's company HR department. Another, identical in content, was addressed to Carl's immediate superior, a man named Henderson, whose name Frank had gleaned from LinkedIn. He used a discreet postal service, ensuring no return address. Then, he waited. The waiting was the hardest part, a slow, simmering tension beneath his skin. A week later, an anonymous email landed in his inbox. The sender was untraceable, but the message was clear. Investigation into Mr. Peterson initiated. Thank you for your concern. A small, cold wave of satisfaction washed over Frank. The first domino had fallen. Almost simultaneously, a separate, heavier package arrived at Carl's home. It contained the most damning evidence. The intimate emails printed in full, the graphic text messages, the photos of Carl and Mary Beth on the beach. Frank had made sure it landed directly in Martha's mailbox. ensuring Carl couldn't intercept it. Rumors started swirling at Carl's office. Tim heard them. Vague whispers about an internal investigation. A sudden suspension. He called Frank, his voice hushed. "Something's going on with Carl, Frank. He hasn't been in all week. People are saying it's bad." Then Mary Beth called, her voice shrill with panic. "Frank, it's a disaster. Carl, he's been fired. And Martha, she's left him. She found out everything. She saw the pictures. She's taking the kids, Frank. He's completely ruined." Her words were punctuated by desperate sobs. Mary Beth was distraught. The full, devastating extent of the professional and personal fallout finally hitting her. She had been so caught up in the romance, the fantasy. She hadn't considered the wreckage it would leave. Frank listened, his face impassive. A fleeting sense of vindication, sharp and immediate, pierced through him, but it was quickly followed by a hollow ache, a realization that even this victory tasted like ash. It didn't bring back what he had lost. A few days later, as Frank was picking up groceries at the local supermarket, Carl Peterson appeared from behind an aisle, his face a mask of furious rage. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, a stark contrast to the impeccably groomed executive Frank remembered. Carl lunged, stopping just short of Frank's personal space. "You son of a bitch!" Carl hissed, his voice low but vibrating with intensity. "You ruined my life. My career, my wife, my kids, it's all gone. Because of you." Frank met his gaze, his own eyes calm, steady. "You ruined your own life, Carl," he replied, his voice even, devoid of emotion. "I just showed everyone the truth. You made the choices." The confrontation, hushed yet potent, drew the attention of other shoppers. Heads turned, eyes widened. Carl's humiliation was public, a spectacle of his own making. He glared at Frank for another long moment, then spun around and stormed out of the store, leaving a trail of shocked silence in his wake. Later that evening, Frank's phone rang. It was Mary Beth's parents. His mother-in-law, usually so warm, sounded strained, her voice tinged with disappointment and concern for her daughter. "Frank, what's happening?" "Mary Beth is a mess. She says you're not talking to her." "We're so worried," Frank explained, calmly, carefully, laying out the bare facts of Mary Beth's betrayal, leaving out his own campaign of retribution. He could hear his father-in-law's heavy sigh in the background. Mary Beth called again, her voice pleading, desperate. "Frank, please, I'll change. I promise. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. Please. Let's fight for this. For us." Frank listened, his heart a stone. "Mary Beth," he said, his voice quiet. "The trust is shattered. Beyond repair. You made your choices. I've made mine." He heard her broken sob on the other end, then the click of the line. The next day, a thick envelope arrived from his lawyer. Inside were the official divorce papers, stark and formal, a tangible representation of the absolute end. He signed them without hesitation. The immediate thrill of revenge, the brief satisfaction of Carl's downfall, began to fade, leaving Frank with the grim reality of his own broken life, a future that felt cold and empty. In the weeks that followed, Mary Beth's life in their small town began to unravel publicly. The whispers grew louder, transforming from gossip into established fact. Social ostracism became a tangible thing. A sudden quiet when she entered a room, averted gazes at the grocery store. Her career, once promising, started to suffer, mirroring Carl's professional downfall. Clients, wary of association with scandal, quietly withdrew. Colleagues kept their distance. The impact of Frank's actions was undeniable, visible in her increasingly drawn face, the way she carried herself. Smaller, diminished. Frank saw it all. He heard the second-hand reports, saw her from a distance, looking lost and alone. A complex mix of pity and a cold, hard justice swirled within him. He hadn't wanted to destroy her entirely, only to hold her accountable. But the town had its own, unwritten rules, its own mechanisms of punishment. The divorce proceedings dragged on, A slow, bureaucratic drain on his energy and his savings. Lawyers' fees accumulated, documents piled up, each one a stark reminder of what was being irrevocably dismantled. His own emotional state remained fragile, a landscape of lingering anger, profound sadness, and a persistent, heavy loneliness that settled in the quiet corners of the house. Tim remained a steady presence, calling regularly, stopping by with takeout. "You did what you had to do, Frank," he'd say, over and over, reinforcing Frank's conviction, pulling him back from the edge of doubt. She made her bed. Frank tried to rebuild his life. He returned to work, forcing himself to focus on spreadsheets and client accounts. He started small home improvement projects, painted the spare bedroom, pruned the overgrown bushes in the backyard. But the shadow of the past, of Mary Beth, of Carl, of the betrayal, remained. A persistent phantom in every room. He learned, through the casual grapevine of the town, that Carl Peterson had left, packed up his things, sold his house, and vanished. Unable to face the disgrace, the shattered reputation, Frank felt nothing. Not relief, not triumph, just a vague sense of closure, like turning the final page of a long, unpleasant book. Then came Mary Beth's last call. Her voice was raw, devoid of the earlier defiance or panic. It was simply tired, broken. "Frank," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I was wrong. About everything. I messed up. I really did. I'm so sorry. I know I hurt you. Please, can we just talk? One last time? I need you to know I regret it. All of it." Frank listened, his hand gripping the phone. He considered her plea, the deep regret evident in her tone. He knew she was truly acknowledging her mistakes now, facing the consequences. But he also recognized the fundamental, irreparable shift in their relationship. Forgiveness, he realized, didn't always mean forgetting or rebuilding. It just meant letting go of the anger, for his own sake. But not the hurt. The hurt was a part of him now. He felt the emptiness of winning. Revenge, while it had offered a fleeting satisfaction, hadn't brought back what was lost. It hadn't healed the wound, it had merely inflicted new ones. The community slowly started to move on. New gossip replaced old, new dramas unfolded. But the story of the Millers' divorce, the infidelity, and its dramatic fallout, lingered. It became a local cautionary tale, whispered in hushed tones. A reminder of the fragility of trust and the destructive power of secrets. Frank struggled with the moral implications of his revenge. Had he become what he hated? Had his calculated campaign of exposure, of destruction, made him as cold and unforgiving as Carl had been careless and selfish? The questions gnawed at him, leaving him restless and uncertain. He made an appointment. Therapy. He needed to talk, to untangle the knotted mess of anger, sadness, and self-doubt. He acknowledged the deep emotional scars left by the betrayal, recognizing that some wounds didn't heal easily, or entirely. He was paying a price, too. Everyone involved in infidelity, he understood now, truly paid a toll. Not just the guilty, but everyone in the blast radius. Months, then almost a year, drifted by like the leaves falling from the oak outside his kitchen window. The initial rawness of the heartbreak, the cold heat of revenge, slowly began to dull. Frank found a semblance of peace in his quiet, solitary life. The house, once filled with the ghosts of shared memories, slowly started to feel like his own again, a space for quiet reflection rather than lingering pain. The divorce was finally finalized. A stack of official papers, signed and stamped, sat on his kitchen counter for a few days before he filed them away. The end of a chapter, formal and absolute. He embraced his independence, a quiet freedom he hadn't known he'd missed. He started playing his old guitar again, strings humming familiar, forgotten melodies. He dug out his dusty collection of model airplanes, spending evenings meticulously gluing tiny pieces together. Rediscovering these old hobbies was a slow, deliberate act of self-reclamation. He felt the healing, a gradual release of the anger and resentment that had consumed him for so long. It wasn't a sudden burst of light, but a slow, steady easing, like a long winter giving way to spring. The weekly therapy sessions helped, providing a space to articulate the tangled emotions, to understand the roots of his pain and his reactions. Frank took a small trip, a solo journey across the state, just to clear his head. He drove for hours, the flat Midwestern landscape blurring outside his window. He stopped at small towns, ate at roadside diners, and walked along quiet, unfamiliar streets. He reflected on his journey, the unexpected detours, the harsh terrain. He considered the lessons learned, the profound fragility of trust, how easily it could be shattered, and the equally profound importance of self-respect, of standing up for oneself even when it felt like the world was falling apart. He started meeting new people, cautiously exploring the possibility of new connections. A neighbor invited him to a community potluck. Tim introduced him to a friend from his bowling league. He exchanged polite conversation, smiled, even laughed, but his heart remained guarded, a quiet fortress built from experience. He was open, but observant, listening more than he spoke, assessing the landscape of human interaction with a newfound clarity. A brief, impersonal letter arrived in the mail one afternoon. The postmark was from a city several states away. It was from Mary Beth. No apology, no explanation, just a few lines wishing him well, hoping he was finding peace. It was a final, distant acknowledgement, a faint echo from a life that was now definitively in the past. He read it once, then tossed it into the recycling bin. Frank realized that while the pain might never fully vanish, a faint scar would always remain. It no longer defined him. It was a part of his story, not the whole of it. He accepted that some relationships, once broken, were simply beyond repair. Sometimes, the strongest act wasn't holding on, but letting go, allowing both parties to find their own paths. He made peace with his actions. He hadn't sought to destroy, only to expose. He had sought justice, in his own way, and the consequences had unfolded as they were always bound to. The quiet appreciation for the simple, honest moments of everyday life grew. A good cup of coffee on a sunny morning, the warmth of a phone call with Tim, the rustle of leaves in his yard. He visited his parents, sharing a quiet, understanding meal. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic confessions, just the comfortable silence of family who knew and understood. He found solace in their unwavering presence, a steady anchor in the ever-shifting currents of life. He decided to invest in his future, making plans for a life lived authentically, without the shadow of deception. The scars remained, a map of where he had been, but they were fading, softening, reminding him of a past he had survived, a man who had come through the fire. Frank stood on the threshold of a new chapter, a quiet strength within him, ready to face whatever came next. A testament to resilience after heartbreak and betrayal. Months passed, the raw edge of betrayal slowly softening into a dull ache Frank had learned to live with. The divorce was finalized, papers signed, and the quiet of his house settled in. No longer an oppressive silence, but a canvas for his own rediscovered rhythm. He spent evenings playing his old guitar, the chords a familiar comfort. Weekends were for hiking the trails near town, the crisp Midwestern air clearing his mind. He knew Mary Beth had moved away, a brief, impersonal letter serving as her final goodbye. Carl Peterson had vanished too, leaving town under a cloud of disgrace. Frank felt no triumph from their downfalls, only the quiet understanding that every action carries a cost. He had sought justice, and in its wake, found not happiness, but a hard-won peace. The scars of that time remained, subtle lines on his soul, reminders of what was lost and what was endured. He started therapy, acknowledging the deep emotional work still ahead. He was learning to live authentically, without the ghost of deception, building a future on honesty and self-respect. The town still remembered the story, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. But for Frank, it was simply a past he had survived. He stood on the threshold of a new dawn, a quiet strength within him, ready to face whatever came next.